The massive command deck of the Zephyrian mothership Eternal Dominion fell silent as Queen Vexthara's armored form trembled with barely contained rage. Her 12-foot frame, encased in the legendary Sovereign battle armor, stood motionless in the center of the circular chamber. The armor, forged from quantum-aligned metallurgy and powered by miniaturized dark matter cores, had been the symbol of Zephyrian supremacy for over 3 millennia. Now it was broken. The quantum servos that once moved with the fluidity of liquid mercury now stuttered and sparked. The energy shields that could deflect plasma cannons flickered like dying flames. Most humiliating of all, the neural interface that allowed the Queen to command her vast fleet through thought alone had gone completely dark. "Who repair my armor?" Queen Vexthara's voice boomed through the command deck speakers, amplified by the ship's communication systems, since her armor's voice modulators were among the many systems failing. Her natural voice, a series of clicking mandibles and harmonic resonances that her species used for communication, was automatically translated for the benefit of the various alien species serving aboard her vessel. The assembled crew of engineers, technicians, and specialists from a dozen different star systems shuffled nervously. Representatives from the crystalline hegemony, their silicon-based forms refracting the command deck's light into rainbow patterns, exchanged worried glances with their photosynthetic colleagues from the Verdant Collective. The mechanical Axiom Syndicate units, their chrome bodies whirring softly, processed the situation with calculating efficiency. Chief Engineer Mordaki, a towering member of the gas giant dwelling Tempest Lords, floated forward on his anti-gravity platform. His translucent blue form rippled with nervous energy as he spoke through his atmospheric containment suit. "Your Majesty, our most skilled technicians have examined the armor repeatedly. The damage from the battle with the Void Hunters has corrupted the quantum matrix in ways we cannot understand. The technology is beyond our current comprehension. Even our most advanced diagnostic equipment cannot identify the specific failure points." Queen Vexthara's mandibles clicked dangerously. The Sovereign battle armor had been gifted to her dynasty by the ancients themselves, the mysterious precursor race that had vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago. Its technology was so advanced that even after 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire's greatest minds could barely maintain it, let alone repair complex damage. 3 weeks, she hissed. 3 weeks I've been trapped in this malfunctioning shell, unable to properly command my fleet, unable to interface with our tactical systems, unable to even move without the constant threat of complete system shutdown. And you tell me it cannot be repaired. The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, every being on the command deck understood the gravity of their situation. The Zephyrian Empire was engaged in a brutal war against the expansionist Federation of United Worlds, and their queen's inability to function at full capacity had already cost them 2 star systems. Dr. Zilla of the Hegemony, her crystalline form chiming softly as she moved, stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Your Majesty, there is one possibility we have not yet explored." Queen Vexthara's 6 eyes focused on the crystal being with laser intensity. "Speak." "The humans," Dr. Zilla said, her harmonic voice carrying a note of uncertainty. "They have recently joined our coalition against the Federation. Their engineering approaches are unconventional. Where we rely on quantum mechanics and exotic matter, they seem to achieve remarkable results through what they call creative problem solving and making things work with whatever's available." A collective murmur rippled through the assembled aliens. The humans were relative newcomers to galactic civilization, having only achieved faster-than-light travel a mere 2 centuries ago. Most species consider them primitive, their technology crude, and their methods unrefined. Commander Zalthex of the Axiom Syndicate, his mechanical voice carrying a note of disdain, interjected. "The humans lack even basic quantum manipulation technology. Their ships still rely on fusion reactors and magnetic confinement systems. How could such a primitive species possibly repair technology that has defeated our greatest minds?" because came a new voice from the back of the command deck. Sometimes the solution isn't about having the most advanced technology. Sometimes it's about understanding how things actually work. All eyes turned to see a small figure making its way through the crowd of towering aliens. Jake Morrison, the sole human engineer assigned to the Eternal Dominion as part of the new coalition agreement, walked forward with the casual confidence that seemed to characterize his species. At just over 6 feet tall, Jake was dwarfed by nearly every other being on the command deck. His simple blue coveralls, covered in grease stains and tool marks, looked shabby compared to the elegant environmental suits and natural armor of his colleagues. The toolkit slung over his shoulder contained implements that most aliens would consider laughably primitive: wrenches, screwdrivers, wire strippers, and various measuring devices that didn't require quantum sensors or exotic matter to function. Queen Vexthara's massive form turned to face the human, her alien features unreadable behind the flickering energy fields of her damaged helmet. "You believe you can repair what the greatest minds in known space cannot." Jake shrugged, a gesture that conveyed both humility and confidence in the peculiar way humans manage such contradictions. "I don't know, Your Majesty, but I'd like to take a look if you don't mind." The audacity of the request sent shocked murmurs through the crowd. The sovereign battle armor was not merely a piece of equipment. It was a sacred relic, a symbol of imperial power that had been worn by 43 generations of Zephyrian rulers. The idea that a primitive human would dare to examine it with his crude tools seemed almost blasphemous. Chief Engineer Mordaki's atmospheric suit flared with indignation. "The presumption, human, this armor contains technology that predates your species' written history. Your crude mechanical approaches could damage systems beyond any hope of repair." But Queen Vexthara raised one massive armored hand for silence. Her 6 eyes studied Jake with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating potential prey. In her 3 centuries of rule, she had learned to recognize certain qualities in beings: intelligence, determination, and the rare spark of innovation that could turn desperate situations into unexpected victories. "What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed, human?" Jake met her gaze without flinching, despite the fact that she could crush him like an insect even with her armor malfunctioning. "Because, Your Majesty, I don't see ancient technology when I look at your armor. I see a machine. And every machine, no matter how advanced, follows certain basic principles. Energy has to flow from point A to point B. Moving parts need lubrication and proper alignment. Information needs pathways to travel. When something breaks, it's usually because one of those basic principles has been violated." He gestured toward the massive form of the Queen. "Your quantum matrix might be corrupted, but that corruption had to start somewhere. Maybe it's not about fixing the quantum components directly. Maybe it's about figuring out what's causing the corruption and addressing that." Dr. Zilla's crystalline form chimed with interest. "An intriguing perspective. You would approach this as a troubleshooting exercise rather than an attempt to understand ancient technology." "Exactly," Jake nodded. "I don't need to understand how every component works. I just need to figure out what's broken and why. Then, I can either fix it or find a workaround." The command deck fell silent as Queen Vexthara considered this proposal. The weight of her decision pressed down on everyone present. If she allowed the human to examine her armor and he caused further damage, it could mean not only her death, but the collapse of the entire coalition against the Federation. But if she continued as she was, the outcome was already certain. The Federation's forces were advancing on 3 fronts, and without her full capabilities, the coalition fleet was slowly losing ground. In another month, perhaps 2 at most, they would be forced to retreat to their core systems and begin preparing for a siege that they could not win. "Very well, human," Queen Vexthara said finally. "You will examine my armor. But understand this. If your primitive methods cause any additional damage, I will personally ensure that your species' membership in this coalition comes to an immediate and unpleasant end." Jake nodded solemnly. "Understood, Your Majesty. I'll be careful. You will work under the supervision of our senior engineers." Chief Engineer Mordaki interjected. Any modifications or repairs must be approved by the technical council before implementation. Actually, Jake said, pulling a battered tablet from his toolkit, I'd prefer to work alone, at least for the initial examination. Too many people offering suggestions tends to complicate the diagnostic process. But I'll document everything and share my findings with your team. The suggestion that a human would work unsupervised on the most important piece of technology in the Zephyrian Empire sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the assembled aliens. But Queen Vexthera, with the decisive nature that had made her an effective military leader, cut through the protests. The human will have 12 hours to conduct his initial examination. If he discovers anything promising, we will consider allowing him to proceed. If not, she left the threat unspoken. As the crowd of engineers and technicians reluctantly dispersed, Jake approached the towering form of Queen Vexthera with his crude instruments in hand. The ancient armor seemed to dwarf him even more as he got closer, its darkened energy fields and stuttering servo motors creating an aura of barely contained power and frustration. Okay, Jake murmured to himself as he powered up his tablet and began connecting various diagnostic cables to access ports that most aliens had never noticed. Let's see what you're all about. What happened next would become the stuff of legend throughout the galaxy. But at that moment, Jake Morrison was simply an engineer with a problem to solve, approaching the greatest technological challenge of his career with nothing more than curiosity, determination, and an unshakable belief that every machine could be understood if you looked at it the right way. The massive armor loomed over him, its ancient secrets hidden within layers of quantum mechanics and exotic matter that defied conventional understanding. But Jake had never been particularly concerned with conventional understanding. He was more interested in making things work. And as he began his examination, connecting his simple diagnostic tools to systems that had baffled the galaxy's greatest minds, the first glimmer of an idea began to form in his thoughts. It was an idea so simple, so fundamentally basic, that no one else had thought to consider it. The ancients, for all their advanced technology, had been engineers too. And engineers, no matter what species they belonged to or how advanced their civilization, all faced the same fundamental challenges when building something that needed to last. Queen Vexthera watched in silence as the small human began his work, her 6 eyes following his every movement. Despite her skepticism, she found herself hoping that his primitive confidence was justified. Because if it wasn't, her empire might not survive long enough to find another solution. The war against the Federation was entering a critical phase, and time was running out for everyone. Jake Morrison had been working for 8 hours straight when he made the discovery that would change everything. The command deck had been cleared except for Queen Vexthera herself, who remained motionless in the center of the chamber like a technological monument to a lost age. The massive Zephyrian ruler had said nothing during Jake's examination, but her 6 eyes tracked his every movement with predatory intensity. The diagnostic cables from Jake's tablet snaked across the quantum black surface of the sovereign battle armor like technological ivy, carrying streams of data that his relatively simple instruments converted into patterns he could understand. While the alien engineers had focused on the quantum matrices and exotic matter conduits, Jake had taken a different approach entirely. He had started with the basics: power distribution, information flow, mechanical stress points, environmental factors, the same principles that governed every machine ever built, whether it was a simple combustion engine or a starship's faster-than-light drive. Jake's human-made diagnostic tools couldn't comprehend the advanced physics that made the armor function, but they could detect energy signatures, temperature variations, electromagnetic fluctuations, and structural integrity issues. And what they were telling him didn't match what anyone else had reported. Interesting, Jake murmured, studying the readouts on his tablet. He had been talking to himself throughout the examination, a habit that usually annoyed his colleagues, but helped him think through complex problems. Queen Vexthera's voice rumbled through the command deck speakers. Explain. Jake looked up at the towering armored figure, his eyes bright with the excitement of discovery. Your Majesty, everyone's been focusing on the quantum matrix corruption, assuming it was caused by battle damage from the Void Hunters. But my readings suggest something different. He gestured toward his tablet, where graphs and charts displayed data in formats that the alien engineers would have considered laughably primitive. The quantum corruption isn't random. It's following a specific pattern, spreading through the armor's neural interface pathways in a very systematic way. That's not how battle damage typically propagates. Continue, the Queen commanded, though Jake caught a note of interest in her electronically transmitted voice. So, I started looking at environmental factors. Jake continued, walking around the massive armored form with his tablet in hand. Temperature variations, electromagnetic interference, chemical contamination, that sort of thing. And I found something that shouldn't be there. He stopped near the armor's left shoulder assembly, where several of his diagnostic cables converged on what appeared to be a maintenance access panel. There's a biological signature here, very faint, but consistent across multiple sensor types. Queen Vexthara's armored head turned toward him with a grinding sound of malfunctioning servos. Biological? Explain the significance. Jake's expression grew serious as he consulted his readings. Your Majesty, I think your armor has been sabotaged. The silence that followed was so complete that Jake could hear the subtle harmonics of a ship's life support systems. When Queen Vexthara finally spoke, her voice carried a deadly calm that made the air itself seem to vibrate with menace. Elaborate. Jake took a deep breath, knowing that his next words could determine not only his fate, but potentially the outcome of an interstellar war. The biological signature is consistent with Zephyrian genetic material, but it's been modified with synthetic compounds I don't recognize. Someone introduced a biological agent into your armor's maintenance systems, something designed to gradually corrupt the quantum matrix from within. He pulled up another display on his tablet, showing a time progression graph of the armor's declining performance. The corruption didn't start during the battle with the Void Hunters. It started 6 weeks ago, during your last maintenance cycle. The battle damage just accelerated a process that was already underway. Queen Vexthara's massive form stood perfectly still for nearly a full minute as she processed this information. Jake could almost feel the alien ruler's mind working, connecting dots that painted a picture of betrayal from within her own ranks. You are claiming that someone with access to my personal armor has committed an act of treason, she said finally. I'm claiming that someone with very specific knowledge of Zephyrian biology and ancient technology has tried to kill you in a way that would look like equipment failure, Jake replied. And they almost succeeded. The implications were staggering. If Jake was correct, it meant that someone within Queen Vexthara's inner circle had access to both her armor and the sophisticated biotechnology needed to create a quantum-corrupting biological agent. The number of individuals with such capabilities could be counted on one hand. Can you reverse the damage? Queen Vexthara asked. Jake studied his readings carefully before responding. Maybe. The biological agent is still active, but it's designed to work slowly to avoid detection. If I can neutralize it and then repair the corrupted pathways, there's a chance I can restore full functionality. What do you require? Access to your armor's internal maintenance systems, some basic laboratory equipment, and about 12 hours of uninterrupted work, Jake replied. And, Your Majesty, you'll need to remove the armor. Another deadly silence fell over the command deck. The idea that a Zephyrian queen would remove the sovereign battle armor in the presence of an alien, especially a human, was almost unthinkable. The armor was not just a symbol of power, but a sacred trust passed down through generations. For 43 dynasties, no one outside the royal bloodline had ever seen the inner workings of the suit. But Queen Vexthara had not maintained her rule for 3 centuries by being bound by tradition when survival was at stake. Very well, she said. But understand this, human, if you're incorrect about any aspect of your diagnosis, if this is some elaborate deception to gain access to ancient technology, I will ensure that your death serves as a lesson to your entire species. Jake nodded gravely. I understand, Your Majesty, but I'm not wrong about this. Someone tried to kill you, and they're probably still on this ship." As if responding to some silent command, the massive doors to Queen Vexthara's private chambers slid open with a whisper of hydraulics. The Queen began walking toward them, her damaged armor producing a symphony of grinding servos and sparking energy conduits with each step. "You will accompany me," she commanded. "And, human, you will tell no one what you observe within my chambers." Jake followed the towering alien ruler through corridors that grew increasingly opulent as they approached the heart of the ship. The walls were decorated with holographic displays showing the history of the Zephyrian Empire, and the very air seemed to hum with power from the advanced technology that maintained the Queen's personal quarters. The private chambers themselves were vast, designed to accommodate Vexthara's massive frame and various alien dignitaries. The centerpiece was a technological marvel, a maintenance and repair station specifically designed for the sovereign battle armor. Ancient symbols glowed along its edges, and the entire structure radiated an aura of power that made Jake's primitive diagnostic tools react with excited chirping. "The removal process takes approximately 1 hour," Queen Vexthara explained as she approached the maintenance station. "The armor's biological interfaces must be gradually disconnected to avoid neural shock. During this time, I will be completely vulnerable." The implications of that statement were not lost on Jake. If he was wrong about the sabotage, if this was some elaborate Federation plot to assassinate the Zephyrian Queen, he now had the perfect opportunity. But if he was right, then removing the armor was the only way to save her life. "I'll monitor the process," Jake said, connecting his diagnostic equipment to the maintenance station's interface ports. "If anything goes wrong, I should be able to detect it." What followed was one of the most remarkable technological displays Jake had ever witnessed. The Sovereign battle armor began to unfold like a metallic flower, revealing layer upon layer of exotic technology. Neural interface cables retracted with serpentine grace, quantum field generators powered down in carefully orchestrated sequences, and the massive external shell separated into dozens of precisely engineered components. Queen Vexthara emerged from this technological chrysalis like an alien butterfly. Without the armor, she stood nearly 10 feet tall, her natural exoskeleton displaying the deep purple and gold patterns that marked her royal lineage. Her 6 arms moved with fluid grace as she disconnected the final neural interfaces, and her large black eyes regarded Jake with an intensity that was both alien and unmistakably intelligent. "Now," she said, her natural voice a complex harmony of clicking and resonant tones that the ship's translation systems rendered into human speech, "show me what you have discovered." Jake approached the armor's internal systems with the reverence of a pilgrim entering a sacred shrine. The technology before him represented millions of years of advancement beyond anything humanity had achieved, and yet the principles underlying its operation were fundamentally recognizable. "There," he said, pointing to a series of bioneural interfaces near the armor's central processing core. "The biological agent has been introduced here in a primary neural pathway. It's designed to mimic natural organic degradation while systematically corrupting the quantum matrices." He pulled out a small sampling device from his toolkit, something that looked laughably crude compared to the ancient technology surrounding it. "I need to extract a sample for analysis. My equipment might be primitive, but it should be able to identify the specific compounds involved." As Jake worked, Queen Vexthara watched with fascination. The human's approach was unlike anything she had observed from her own engineers. Where they focused on understanding the technology itself, he concentrated on understanding what was wrong with it. Where they sought to comprehend ancient science, he simply wanted to fix a problem. "Interesting," Jake murmured as his tablet displayed the results of the biological analysis. "The base agent is definitely Zephyrian, but it's been enhanced with synthetic proteins I've never seen before. Whoever created this had access to very advanced biotechnology." Queen Vexthara's expression grew dark. "The number of individuals with such capabilities is limited." "That's what I was thinking," Jake agreed. "But the good news is that I can neutralize this." The synthetic proteins have a specific electromagnetic signature. If I can generate the right frequency, I should be able to break down the agent without damaging the quantum matrices. He began assembling what looked like a collection of spare parts into a device that defied easy description. Components from his toolkit, interface cables from the armor's maintenance station, and various improvised connections created something that no engineer from any known species would have attempted. "You're building this from scraps," Queen Vexthera observed, her tone carrying a note of amazement. Jake grinned, the expression carrying the irrepressible optimism that characterized the species. "That's what humans do, Your Majesty. We make things work with whatever we have available." As he worked, Jake explained his approach in simple terms that the Queen could understand. The biological agent was essentially a microscopic saboteur designed to gradually corrupt the armor's neural pathways over time. But, like any biological system, it had vulnerabilities. The synthetic proteins that made it so effective also made it susceptible to targeted electromagnetic interference. "The tricky part," Jake said as he made final adjustments to his improvised device, "is generating exactly the right frequency without disrupting the quantum matrices themselves. Too low, and it won't affect the agent. Too high, and we could cause cascade failures throughout the entire system." Queen Vexthera moved closer, her natural height allowing her to observe Jake's work despite the complexity of the armor's internal structure. "How do you determine the correct frequency?" Jake held up his tablet, which displayed a real-time analysis of the electromagnetic signatures within the armor. "Trial and error mostly, but educated trial and error. I start with frequencies that are definitely safe, then gradually increase until I see an effect on the biological agent." It was, Queen Vexthera realized, exactly the kind of approach that her own engineers would have dismissed as hopelessly primitive. But as Jake began the process, his crude instruments detecting changes that her advanced sensors had missed, she began to understand why human engineering had earned a reputation for achieving impossible results with inadequate resources. The neutralization process took 3 hours. Jake worked with patient concentration, adjusting frequencies, monitoring results, and gradually breaking down the biological agent that had been slowly killing the ancient armor. Queen Vexthera watched in fascination as her most sacred technology responded to the ministrations of tools that looked like they belonged in a scrapyard. "There," Jake said finally, powering down his improvised device. "The biological agent has been neutralized. Now, I need to repair the corrupted quantum pathways." But that, he knew, would be the real challenge. Neutralizing the sabotage was one thing. Restoring ancient technology to full functionality was something else entirely. Jake Morrison stood before the most advanced piece of technology in known space, armed with nothing more than determination, creativity, and an unwavering belief that every problem had a solution. The Sovereign Battle Armor lay partially disassembled on Queen Vexthera's private maintenance platform, its quantum matrices corrupted by months of biological sabotage. The biological agent had been neutralized, but the damage it had caused remained. Entire neural pathways that had functioned flawlessly for 3 millennia now showed cascade failures throughout their quantum structures. The armor's AI consciousness, ancient beyond human comprehension, flickered in and out of awareness like a dying flame. "The corruption runs deeper than I initially thought," Jake admitted, studying the readouts on his tablet. The biological agent didn't just attack the neural interfaces. It systematically targeted the quantum entanglement bonds that link the armor's consciousness to its physical systems. Queen Vexthera observed from her position near the chamber's massive viewports, her natural form imposing even without her technological enhancement. "Explain what this means for repair prospects." Jake rubbed his eyes, fatigue beginning to show after 16 hours of continuous work. "In human terms, it's like someone didn't just cut the wires in a computer. They scrambled the fundamental laws of physics that make the computer work. Your engineers were right that this kind of damage should be impossible to repair with conventional methods. Yet you continue to work. Why?" The question caught Jake off guard. He paused in his analysis, considering why he hadn't simply admitted defeat like every other engineer who had examined the armor. Because giving up isn't really an option, is it? Your people are fighting a war. Your coalition needs you functional. And someone tried to kill you, which means they're probably planning to try again. He gestured toward the armor's darkened energy cores. But mostly because I think I understand what the ancients were trying to achieve when they built this. They weren't just creating advanced technology. They were building something that could adapt, learn, and repair itself. The consciousness isn't separate from the armor. It's integrated into every quantum matrix and neural pathway. Queen Vexthara's 6 eyes focused on Jake with laser intensity. Continue. The consciousness is the key, Jake explained, his excitement growing as the solution crystallized in his mind. Everyone's been trying to repair the physical damage to the quantum matrices. But what if we approach it from the other direction? What if we help the consciousness rebuild its own pathways? Jake pulled out what looked like a collection of random electronic components from his toolkit. To Zephyrian eyes, the assortment of capacitors, resistors, simple processors, and crude interface cables appeared laughably primitive. But Jake saw something different, the building blocks of a bridge between human engineering and ancient technology. I can't rebuild quantum entanglement bonds, he continued, beginning to connect components in ways that defied conventional design principles. But I can create simple neural pathways that might allow the armor's consciousness to re-establish its connections. Think of it as technological physical therapy. What Jake was proposing was unprecedented. Instead of trying to fix the ancient technology directly, he wanted to create a crude scaffolding that would allow the armor to heal itself. It was like using wooden splints to help a broken bone mend, except the bone was made of quantum mechanics and exotic matter. Queen Vexthara watched in fascination as Jake assembled his improvised neural interface. Human engineering, she realized, approached problems from angles that no other species had considered. Where Zephyrian engineers sought to understand and replicate, humans seemed content to simply make things work, regardless of whether they fully comprehended the underlying principles. This approach is completely unorthodox, she observed. Jake grinned, his hands steady despite his fatigue. Unorthodox is pretty much humanity's specialty, Your Majesty. We've been solving problems with inadequate resources for our entire evolutionary history. It tends to make us creative. The device he was building looked like a technological hybrid between a human computer and something from a mad scientist's laboratory. Quantum interface cables from the armor's maintenance systems connected to simple electronic circuits that Jake had assembled from spare parts. Digital processors barely more advanced than those used in human toasters interfaced with data pathways that operated on principles beyond current scientific understanding. The theory is simple, Jake explained as he worked. The armor's consciousness knows how to rebuild its neural pathways, but the quantum corruption has isolated it from the physical systems. If I can provide alternative routes for information flow, even crude ones, the consciousness might be able to work around the damaged areas and re-establish proper connections. He began connecting his improvised device to the armor's central processing core, a crystalline structure that pulsed with barely visible energy. The moment the connections were established, Jake's primitive electronics began displaying patterns of activity that made no sense according to any known principles of computer science. "It's working," he breathed, watching as data flowed through pathways that should not have been able to carry information at such volumes. The consciousness is trying to communicate through the interface. Queen Vexthara moved closer, her towering form casting shadows across the maintenance platform. "Can you establish meaningful contact?" Jake's fingers flew across his tablet's interface as he attempted to interpret the data streams flowing through his improvised device. The consciousness was clearly active, sending complex patterns of information that his primitive sensors could detect, but not fully comprehend. "I'm getting something," he said, adjusting the interface parameters. It's like trying to have a conversation through a translator that only knows half the words, but there's definitely intelligence on the other side. For the next several hours, Jake worked to refine his communication interface. The process was part art, part science, and part educated guesswork. He would adjust the setting, observe the response from the armor's consciousness, then modify his approach based on the results. Gradually, patterns began to emerge. The consciousness was not just trying to communicate. It was learning to use Jake's crude interface as a tool for rebuilding its damaged pathways. Where the biological sabotage had severed quantum connections, the armor's ancient intelligence found ways to route around the damage using Jake's simple electronic bridges. Incredible. Queen Vexera murmured as she watched energy patterns begin to flow through previously dead sections of her armor. The consciousness is adapting your primitive technology for purposes you never intended. Jake nodded, his eyes bright with wonder. That's the beauty of building something truly intelligent. Give it the tools it needs, and it will find ways to use them that you never imagined. As the restoration process continued, Jake began to understand just how sophisticated the armor's consciousness really was. It wasn't simply repairing damaged pathways. It was redesigning them entirely, creating hybrid systems that combined ancient quantum mechanics with human electronic engineering in ways that shouldn't have been possible. "Your Majesty," Jake said suddenly, noticing a change in the armor's energy patterns, "I think it wants you to reconnect to the neural interface." Queen Vexera approached her armor with the careful movements of someone who had learned not to take advanced technology for granted. The neural interface cables, now supplemented by Jake's crude but functional electronic bridges, extended toward her with fluid grace. "The interface feels different," she reported as she began the connection process. "More responsive, but also expanded somehow." What happened next defied every expectation that either Jake or Queen Vexera had held about ancient technology. As the Queen's consciousness merged with the armor's intelligence, the improvised electronic interfaces didn't simply fade into the background. They integrated into the armor's operating systems, creating entirely new capabilities. The Sovereign Battle Armor came online with a surge of power that made the air itself crackle with energy. But this wasn't the same armor that had been damaged in battle with the Void Hunters. The consciousness had used Jake's primitive electronics as building blocks for something unprecedented, a hybrid system that combined ancient sophistication with human adaptability. Remarkable. Queen Vexera's voice resonated through both the armor's speakers and the chamber's communication system as she tested her restored capabilities. The consciousness has created backup pathways for every critical system. The armor is now more resilient to damage than it was originally. Jake watched in amazement as diagnostic displays showed system performance that exceeded the armor's original specifications. The consciousness hadn't just repaired the damage. It had evolved, creating redundant pathways and adaptive systems that would prevent similar sabotage attempts in the future. But how? Jake asked, staring at readings that suggested his crude electronics were now operating at quantum efficiency levels. Queen Vexera's massive armored form turned toward him, energy fields crackling around her restored systems. "The consciousness learned from your approach, human. Where ancient technology relied on perfection and complexity, your methods emphasized adaptability and redundancy. The consciousness has incorporated these principles into its own design philosophy." The implications were staggering. The most advanced piece of technology in known space had been improved by incorporating engineering principles from one of the galaxy's most primitive species. It was a testament to the power of human ingenuity, the ability to find solutions through creativity and persistence rather than simply through advanced knowledge. "There's something else," Queen Vexera continued, her voice carrying a note of discovery. "The consciousness has identified the source of the biological sabotage. The genetic markers point to Chief Engineer Mordaki of the Tempest Lords." Jake's expression grew grim. The floating gas giant dweller had been the most vocal opponent of allowing a human to examine the armor, and he certainly had the access and knowledge necessary to introduce a biological agent into the maintenance systems. "What will you do?" Jake asked. Queen Vexera's armored form straightened to its full imposing height, energy fields stabilizing around her with deadly purpose. I will deal with the traitor personally. But first, I must thank you, human. Your primitive methods have not only saved my life, but improved my capabilities beyond their original design. Jake shrugged with characteristic human modesty. I just fixed what was broken, Your Majesty. The armor's consciousness did the real work. Nevertheless, the Queen continued, you have demonstrated that human engineering deserves respect rather than dismissal. When word of this spreads through the galaxy, your species will be viewed very differently by the galactic community. As they prepared to leave the private chambers and return to the command deck, Jake reflected on the events of the past day. He had approached the repair as a simple engineering problem, using basic principles and improvised solutions to address what everyone else had considered an impossible challenge. But in doing so, he had accomplished something far more significant than simply fixing a broken machine. He had proven that human ingenuity could make meaningful contributions to galactic civilization, that primitive methods sometimes achieved results that advanced technology could not, and that the willingness to try unconventional approaches could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The war against the Federation was far from over, but now the Coalition had their most powerful asset restored and improved. Queen Vexthara's sovereign battle armor was more than just repaired. It was evolved, incorporating human engineering principles that made it more adaptable and resilient than ever before. And somewhere on the ship, a traitor was about to discover that sabotaging ancient technology was much easier than surviving the wrath of a Zephyrian queen whose armor had just been restored to better than original condition. Jake Morrison, the human engineer who had stepped forward when no one else could provide a solution, had not only saved the day, but fundamentally changed how the galaxy viewed his species. Sometimes the most advanced solution was the simplest one, and sometimes the most primitive approach was exactly what sophisticated technology needed to reach its full potential. In the end, it wasn't about having the most advanced tools or the deepest understanding of exotic physics. It was about refusing to give up, thinking creatively, and remembering that every machine, no matter how sophisticated, was built by engineers who faced the same fundamental challenges of making things work reliably under difficult conditions. The galaxy was about to learn that humans excelled at exactly those kinds of challenges.